The way you walk right now is one of the most powerful predictors of how long you will live and how independently you will function in the years ahead. This is not a motivational claim. It is a quantified, replicated clinical finding documented across multiple longitudinal studies involving thousands of adults over 70 years of age. According to published research on gait speed and mortality, at age 75, slow walkers die on average more than 6 years earlier than normal velocity walkers, and more than 10 years earlier than fast velocity walkers. According to Science Direct's review of gait, balance, and fall prevention in aging populations, abnormalities in gait and balance are found in approximately 35% of adults over the age of 70 and in 61% of adults over the age of 80. This means that by age 70, more than 1 in 3 people are already walking in a way that elevates their fall risk, reduces their functional independence, and, through the same mechanisms, shortens their predicted lifespan, often without having been told by anyone that a change is needed or even possible. The change this video focuses on is not a dramatic physical overhaul or an exercise program requiring equipment or gym membership. It is a specific modification to foot strike pattern and propulsion mechanics during each step of ordinary walking, one that realigns the mechanical chain from foot to knee to hip to spine, as depicted in the thumbnail's before and after comparison. Understanding why this one adjustment matters, as much as published research suggests it does, requires understanding what actually changes in the way older adults walk and why those changes are self-perpetuating once they begin. According to published research on fall prevention cited in Science Direct, individualized assessments that utilize clinical gait and balance measures were effective in reducing the risk of falling in older adults across both a 2003 RAND report and a 2012 Cochrane systematic review, providing the highest quality evidence available that addressing gait specifically, rather than simply promoting general exercise, produces measurable falls reduction outcomes in this population. This video is for educational purposes only and does not replace assessment by a physiotherapist or physician. Any senior with existing joint conditions, balance disorders, a recent history of falls, or any neurological condition affecting gait should discuss gait changes with a healthcare professional before implementing them independently. The walking correction described here is designed for seniors whose gait changes reflect the ordinary physiological effects of aging, not for those whose gait is affected by Parkinson's disease, stroke, peripheral neuropathy, or other conditions that require specialized clinical management. The biology of why walking changes after 70. Gait does not change randomly with age. It follows a predictable pattern of adaptation driven by specific physiological changes that accumulate progressively. According to published research on age-related gait changes, studies comparing healthy persons in their 70s with healthy persons in their 20s demonstrate a 10 to 20% reduction in gait speed and stride length in the older population. Other gait characteristics that commonly change with aging include an increased stance width, increased time spent in the double support phase, meaning both feet on the ground simultaneously, and what the clinical literature specifically identifies as less vigorous force development at the moment of push-off. According to published research on age-related gait parameters, gait speed normally remains stable until about age 70, after which it declines at approximately 15% per decade for usual walking and 20% per decade for maximum walking speed. What is driving these changes? Multiple converging mechanisms. First, the progressive loss of skeletal muscle mass and strength, particularly in the calf muscles and the hip extensors that are responsible for propelling the body forward during each step. Second, the changes in sensory feedback from the foot and ankle, including reduced proprioception, that make balance control less automatic and require more conscious cognitive resources to maintain during walking. Third, the increase in cautious walking behavior that is itself partly driven by fear of falling, a psychological response to the very changes already occurring that can, paradoxically, accelerate them by reducing the physical demand on the muscles and balance systems that need activity to maintain function. According to research on age-related gait from Frontiers in Aging, the adoption of a more cautious walking strategy in older adults may be attributed to natural age-related strength loss, and it remains uncertain whether observed changes in muscle activation result from inherent aging processes or voluntary alterations influenced by psychological factors linked to fear of falling. The implication of this uncertainty is actually optimistic from a practical standpoint. If part of the gait deterioration after 70 is a learned voluntary adaptation driven by fear of falling rather than a purely inevitable physiological consequence, then deliberately reversing that adaptive pattern through practiced, confident walking technique can restore gait quality beyond what purely physical interventions like muscle strengthening alone would achieve. The combination of physical training and movement re-education, which is exactly what focused walking technique practice represents, addresses both the physical and the behavioral psychological dimensions of age-related gait change simultaneously. What the thumbnail shows and what it means for your walking mechanics. The thumbnail's left panel specifically highlights two components of the walking cycle that deteriorate earliest and most significantly with age: the midfoot strike and the toe push-off. Understanding each of these requires a brief explanation of what the normal walking cycle looks like biomechanically. When a person walks optimally, the foot strikes the ground first at the heel, then rolls smoothly through the arch to the midfoot, and then pivots over the toes as the calf muscles and toe flexors generate the push-off force that propels the body forward for the next step. This rolling mechanism, from heel to midfoot to toe, serves multiple functions simultaneously. It absorbs the impact of landing through the arch's natural spring mechanism. It generates propulsive energy from the calf muscles during the push-off phase, and it provides the proprioceptive feedback from the full plantar surface of the foot that the balance system uses to detect and respond to body sway. When this mechanism degrades, as it commonly does after 70, what typically happens first is a reduction in the power and excursion of the toe push-off. The calf muscles, among the first to lose both strength and activation efficiency with age, fail to generate the full forward propulsion that the push-off would normally provide. The result is a step that ends with the foot simply lifting off the ground rather than actively pushing off, eliminating a significant source of forward propulsion and simultaneously reducing the proprioceptive signal from the forefoot that contributes to balance. The second change that commonly accompanies this is a shortening of the stride length, partly because the reduced push-off means each step covers less ground, and partly because a shorter step reduces the time spent balancing on one leg, which is itself a compensatory balance strategy. The thumbnail's right panel, showing the corrected walking posture with a straight spine and the green skeletal alignment from heel through knee to hip, represents the biomechanical restoration that results when these two elements are addressed through specific, practiced walking technique corrections. The walking change. The core technical correction is simple to describe, but requires weeks of deliberate practice to become automatic. Actively pushing off with the toes at the end of each step, rather than allowing the foot to simply lift passively. This one mechanical change, practiced consistently during every walking session, has a cascade of biomechanical effects that address multiple aspects of the age-related gait deterioration described above. When the toes actively push against the ground at the end of each step, the calf muscles are required to contract forcefully through their full functional range, which both utilizes and progressively strengthens precisely the muscle group most responsible for the propulsive component of gait, that deteriorates earliest with age. The push-off also generates the forward momentum that naturally lengthens the stride, since a more powerful push-off propels the body further through the air before the next foot lands. A longer stride means less time in the cautious double support phase, where both feet are on the ground simultaneously, which sounds counterintuitive from a safety perspective, but actually improves balance efficiency by training the balance system to operate confidently during single-leg support. The practical execution for a senior beginning this correction. During each walking session, consciously focus on the final phase of each step, the moment just before the rear foot leaves the ground. Instead of allowing the foot to peel off the ground passively, push through the ball of the foot and the toes actively against the ground, generating a small but distinct upward and forward force. The sensation is similar to pushing off the ground when beginning to walk from a standing start, applied to every single step throughout the walk. In the first sessions, this will feel effortful and unnatural because the calf muscles have been doing less work than they should for months or years, and because any new movement pattern requires conscious attention before it becomes automatic. According to motor learning research, new gait patterns typically require 4 to 8 weeks of consistent practice before they begin to occur automatically, and full integration into unconscious walking behavior may take 3 to 4 months of regular practice. The expectation management this requires is important. A senior who practices the toe push-off correction consistently for 3 weeks and does not yet feel it happening automatically has not failed. They are in the middle of a normal motor learning timeline, and continuing the deliberate practice during this period is precisely what eventually produces the automatic pattern. The moment most seniors report as the first indications that the change is beginning to integrate is when they catch themselves pushing off without consciously intending to, or when they notice their stride feels more energetic and their walking speed has naturally increased without any effort to walk faster. Why gait speed specifically predicts mortality. The clinical literature connecting gait speed to survival outcomes is one of the most robustly replicated findings in geriatric medicine. According to the Scoping Review on Walking Speed as a Predictor in Older Adults, published in PMC, multiple studies found walking speed of approximately 1.0 meters per second, equivalent to covering 10 meters in about 10 seconds, to be a useful marker for delineating risk or decline across a variety of health domains. Clinicians may find a walking speed slower than 1.0 meters per second to be a yellow flag guiding evaluation and intervention. According to the Health, Aging and Body Composition study published in PMC, which followed 2,364 initially well-functioning adults aged 70 to 79 years for 8 years, 3 distinct gait speed trajectories were identified: slow, moderate, and fast decline, with those showing the fastest decline losing 2.4% of their gait speed per year from baseline. The same study specifically concluded that the preservation of gait speed may be more beneficial if promoted earlier rather than later in older adulthood, before decline takes hold. The reason gait speed connects so strongly to overall survival is not simply that it measures physical fitness. It is that gait is a composite measurement that reflects the integrated function of the cardiovascular system, the musculoskeletal system, the neurological system, the cognitive system, and the sensory systems simultaneously. A person cannot maintain normal gait speed if their heart is struggling to deliver oxygen to working muscles, if their muscles have lost too much strength and mass, if their peripheral nerves are not providing adequate sensory feedback, if their cerebellum is not coordinating movement efficiently, or if their cognitive resources are too depleted to manage both walking and any simultaneous task. Gait speed therefore reflects the health of all these systems together, which is why measuring it, as researchers have noted, is as powerful an indicator as an elderly person's number of chronic medical conditions and hospitalizations. The practical clinical test that any senior can self-administer is the 10-meter walk test. Mark a distance of 10 meters in a hallway or garden path. Walk it at your comfortable normal pace and time it. A completion time of 10 seconds or less, equivalent to 1.0 meters per second, represents normal gait speed for this age group. A time between 10 and 13 seconds represents borderline speed warranting attention. A time above 13 seconds, equivalent to less than 0.77 meters per second, represents a clinically meaningful reduction in gait speed that warrants evaluation by a physician or physiotherapist. This test, repeated every 3 to 6 months and recorded as a simple time in seconds, provides one of the most sensitive available measures of functional health trajectory for an adult over 70, and the direction of change in that number over time is at least as clinically meaningful as any single reading. The fall prevention dimension. The thumbnail specifically connects the incorrect walking pattern to a 67% higher fall risk, and this figure reflects the well-established relationship between gait parameter changes and fall incidence in older adults. According to research on gait and fall prevention published in Science Direct, balance and gait disorders are among the most common causes of falls in older individuals, and a growing body of literature indicates a relationship between gait speed and health, overall function, and survivorship. According to the fall prediction model research published in PMC, using wearable sensor data from older adults, stride length and stride time are significant factors in predicting falls, with shorter stride length and more variable stride time, both independently associated with elevated fall risk. The mechanical explanation for why the toe push-off correction specifically reduces fall risk connects to how falls actually occur in the over 70 population. The most common falling mechanism in this age group is not a dramatic trip over an obstacle, but a failure of the balance recovery response, in which a small postural disturbance, a slight uneven surface, a moment of inattention, or a minor muscle activation delay is not compensated by an automatic, sufficiently rapid balance correction before the center of gravity moves outside the base of support. The calf muscles and toe flexors that are strengthened by consistent toe push-off practice are among the primary contributors to the ankle strategy of balance control, the first and most efficient mechanism the body uses to correct small balance disturbances. A person whose calf muscles are stronger and more reactive will have a faster, more powerful ankle strategy response when a small balance disturbance occurs, and will therefore be less likely to require the stepping strategy, where one foot must be moved quickly to create a new base of support as a backup correction mechanism. This matters because the stepping strategy, while effective when it works correctly, requires that the stepping foot lands precisely, that the weight shift is completed quickly, and that the hip and knee extend rapidly to arrest the falling momentum, all of which become less reliable as the muscles involved weaken with age. The ankle strategy, by contrast, operates through calf and foot muscles that can be directly strengthened through the toe push-off practice this video describes, making this one of the few specific, targeted interventions that directly addresses the most fundamental biomechanical cause of falls in this age group, rather than simply adding general exercise to the prescription. The correct posture components. The thumbnail's right panel does not show only the foot mechanics. It shows the full kinetic chain from corrected foot contact through aligned knee and hip to an upright, well-aligned spine. This alignment is not separate from the foot mechanics, but consequentially connected to them. When the toe push-off is active and the stride is appropriately lengthened, the hip extensors, particularly the gluteus maximus and the hamstrings, are required to engage through a fuller range of the gait cycle to carry the leg through its swing phase and place it for the next landing. This increased gluteal engagement naturally produces the upright trunk posture shown in the thumbnail's after image, since the gluteus maximus has a direct postural function in extending and stabilizing the pelvis and lower spine during the stance phase of gait. The bent forward posture that many seniors develop over years of shortened, shuffle-like walking is partly a consequence of the reduced hip extension range that accompanies weak, underused hip extensors, not just a separate postural habit that can be corrected by simply standing up straighter. This means that practicing the toe push-off correction during walking sessions is not only training the calf and foot muscles for their direct propulsive function, it is also applying a consistent, repeated stimulus to the gluteal muscles and hip extensors that progressively restores both the strength and the range of motion in the hip extension component of gait, which in turn allows the trunk to assume its natural upright position during walking without conscious effort. According to clinical biomechanics principles, the upright walking posture shown in the thumbnail's after image is not primarily a matter of conscious spine straightening, but of adequate hip extensor function that allows the pelvis to remain in a neutral position throughout the stance phase. A senior who has been walking with a forward bend for years will not correct this posture by simply reminding themselves to stand up straight. They will correct it by strengthening the hip extensors through gait practice that consistently demands full hip extension range, complemented where possible by specific stretching of the hip flexors, particularly the iliopsoas, which typically becomes shortened and overactivated in people who walk with a forward bent trunk due to the compensatory pattern of reduced hip extension. The practical walking protocol. For a senior over 70 beginning this correction, the most effective approach involves 3 specific elements. First, dedicated practice sessions of 20 to 30 minutes, 3 to 4 times per week, during which the sole focus is on the quality of the toe push-off during every step, rather than on distance, speed, or any destination. The conscious attention required to override the existing automatic walking pattern is cognitively demanding and fatigues quickly when sustained at high intensity, which is why shorter, higher quality practice sessions are more effective for motor learning than longer sessions where attention to the correction lapses after the first 5 minutes. Second, a simple self-monitoring method. During the first minute of each practice walk, check whether the rear foot is actively pushing off the ground or simply lifting. If lifting, it is the old pattern. If pushing, it is the correction. Third, appropriate footwear that does not impede the toe push-off. Shoes with a flexible forefoot that allows the toes to extend and push off naturally, rather than a stiff sole that limits this motion, are a prerequisite for developing this pattern effectively. According to Gait research from the Frontiers Journal on Aging and Gait Parameters, multimodal interventions, including resistance training, are warranted to improve gait stability and reduce fall risk. This means that the walking technique correction described in this video is most effective when complemented by specific strengthening exercises targeting the calf muscles, the hip extensors, and the ankle dorsiflexors, which are also involved in the clearance of the foot during the swing phase of gait. 2 specific complementary exercises that directly support the walking mechanics described in this video require no equipment and can be performed at home. The first is standing calf raises. Standing behind a chair with hands lightly on the back for balance, rise up slowly onto both toes, hold briefly at the top, and lower slowly. Begin with 10 repetitions, focusing on completing the full range of motion at the top of the movement, and progress gradually to 20 or more as the calf muscles strengthen. The second is hip extension exercises. Lying face down on a firm surface or standing holding a wall, lift one leg straight back, focusing on engaging the gluteal muscle rather than the lower back, and hold briefly before lowering. These 2 exercises directly strengthen the specific muscles required for the toe push-off and the hip extension phase of gait, making the walking correction progressively easier and more powerful as strength increases. A physiotherapist or exercise physiologist can design an individualized program that addresses the specific muscle weaknesses driving the individual's gait changes, and a referral for a formal gait assessment should be requested from any primary care physician who observes the combination of slow walking speed, shortened stride length, and increased double support time during an office visit. But for a senior who is not yet working with a physical therapist and wants to begin addressing their walking mechanics immediately, the toe push-off correction during daily walking is the single most accessible, highest leverage change available, requiring no equipment, no cost, and no additional time beyond whatever walking is already being done. Watch the next video on screen right now.